They thought I was too old, too plain, too small town to matter. But when my sister's will put her empire in my hands, her children waged war to take it back. What they didn't know, Ruth had left me more than a boutique. She'd left me the truth. The needle hummed through navy wool, its steady rhythm, a comfort after a lifetime at the sewing table. Outside, Willow Creek stirred winter light on cracked pavement. Coffee from the diner. A neighbor's pickup coughing. Awake. I was mending Mr. Keller's coat, lint clinging to my sweater, when the phone's sharp ring cut through the singer's drone. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. Miss Whitman? A polished voice, like cufflinks placed just so. Daniel Klein, attorney at Drake and Sawyer, Philadelphia. I'm calling about your sister, Ruth Whitman. The room tilted slightly, as if the floor had shifted. Ruth's name, spoken so formally, felt like a thread pulled too tight. Yes, I said, voice taut. I'm sorry to inform you, he said, his tone heavy with hospital corridors. Your sister passed away yesterday. Heart attack. She was 72. The singer's motor whirred, though my foot was off the pedal, as if it breathed for me. Grief sharpened the room, every pin, every seam stood out, cruelly vivid. Ruth. Her name rose, carrying memories, her laugh in our mother's kitchen, sliding a thimble onto my finger, promising we'd escape this town. Thank you, I managed, though nothing was clear. There's more, Mr. Klein said gently. Ruth named you sole beneficiary of her estate, her boutique, Ruth's atelier in Philadelphia, and a substantial financial portfolio. We'll review details at the will reading. The words landed like heavy cloth, unrolling across my life. I knew of the boutique from a magazine ad, Ruth's name, under a dress like moonlight in silk. But me, inheriting it? It felt like a mistake meant for another Vera. I don't. I started but stopped. He gave details, dates, Walnut Street. The reading kindly, not pushing. I heard only the panic beneath his words. After hanging up, I stood, hand on the singer, its metal grounding me. The sewing room smelled of steam and chalk. A sunbeam, turning pins into a constellation. I thought of our parents, their pride in our Ruth, never me. Ruth had left for the city in a blue dress, and I'd waved, the good daughter, quiet, steady. Years had tailored me into someone who accepted silence. We'd sent holiday cards, then fewer, then none. Pride, or fear, had kept me from reaching out. Now, guilt circled like a stray dog. Why would Ruth leave her fortune to a sister she hadn't seen in years? I sat by the window, the light bruised, the house pressing close. I made tea I didn't drink, set it beside buttons, waiting to be sewn. The radio's murmur, a ball game out of season, felt wrong. I turned it off. In the quiet, I recalled Ruth's boldness, sewing a blanket from scraps, promising beauty. My ledger, smudged with pencil, held the Philadelphia address I wrote in careful block letters. Old doubts. Who do you think you are, Vera? Met a firmer voice. Who else did she think you were? Grief and guilt didn't fade, but I let them sit. Ruth's elegant life, my modest one. The distance wasn't just miles. If she'd chosen me, maybe she'd wanted to mend something we both carried. I packed my navy dress, sensible shoes, and a shawl, habits like straight pins tucked in my tote. Touching the singer's throat, I whispered, I'll be back. I called Mr. Klein, voice steady, like a seam pressed flat. Yes, I said, the word properly hemmed. I'll be there. Philadelphia was loud in a way Willow Creek never was. I stepped out of the cab onto Walnut Street and felt the cold glass facades of the shops looking me over. My reflection in the boutique windows, a short, older woman in a wool coat with the lining worn thin, looked like it had wandered onto the wrong film set. Ruth's atelier stands ahead, a corner of glass and brushed steel, its name etched in elegant gold script. I paused just inside the doorway, the scent of expensive perfume drifting around me. A woman approached first, tall, poised, with hair like spun copper, a diamond pendant resting where her collarbone met her throat. "Aunt Vera," she said, and her voice had the warmth of a hand held just over ice. "Elaine." Behind her, a man in a charcoal suit appeared, his jaw tight, his tie knotted with the precision of habit. "James," he said shortly, and then there was Tom, Elaine's husband, a man whose presence seemed to fill the space without effort. Navy suit, watch glinting, the smooth confidence of someone who had never worried about a bill in his life. For perhaps half a minute, there was the brittle politeness of strangers forced to share a room. We traded comments about the weather, about the city's traffic, all in a tone too clean to be genuine. Then the temperature in the room shifted. James slid his hands into his pockets, looked at me with the cool appraisal of a man examining a weak witness. "We'll be frank," he said. "Mother's decision. It was unexpected. Given your background." His pause was deliberate, as if the word background was a polite substitute for something far less generous. Elaine's smile didn't move her eyes. "This is a sophisticated business. It requires a certain touch." We were very close to her final months. And frankly, Aunt Vera, she wasn't herself. The medication. She was in no condition to make life-changing decisions. James cut in smoothly. "We intend to contest the will. For everyone's sake, it's best if you avoid that kind of unpleasantness." Tom stepped forward slightly, his voice lower but no softer. "We can arrange something for you. A comfortable sum. Enough to go back to your simple life. Without complications." My mouth was dry. The polished wood floor seemed to lean under my feet. I saw my own coat in the mirrored wall frayed at the cuffs, a button repaired with thread that didn't quite match. And I felt, in that instant, the gap between their world and mine like a blade pressed to fabric, ready to cut. Tom changed at me, then at Elaine, and stated just loudly enough, "Too old. And uneducated. She couldn't run this place if she tried." The words slid under my skin, sharp and cold. I managed to keep my voice steady when I focused on them for their concerns, though my cheeks burned. By evening, I was in a motel room with wallpaper that had given up the will to cling. I sat on the edge of the bed, their voices still circling in my head. Too old, uneducated, background. For a while, I wondered if they were right. What did I know of running a boutique like this? My world had been hems and seams, patching rather than creating, working alone in a room where the most pressing decision was the shade of thread to use. In their eyes, I was an intruder in Ruth's empire, an embarrassment to be quietly paid off. But somewhere in the tangle of shame and exhaustion, a thought began to take shape. Mr. Klein's voice from the phone call came back to me measured, certain. "Your sisters will be quite deliberate." Ruth had chosen me, not them. Not because of business sense or social polish, but for a reason I didn't yet understand. That reason was enough to keep me from picking up the phone and accepting their offer. I pulled my coat tighter and lay back. The shame was still there, but underneath it, something small and warm flickered. A kind of defiance, fragile but real, as if it had been waiting all these years for the right moment to speak. The next morning, I walked into Ruth's atelier, as if I were stepping onto another planet. The gowns on the mannequins seemed to breathe in their glass cases, folds of silk and chiffon catching light, in ways my small sewing room back in Willow Creek could never have imagined. I moved slowly through the showroom, my fingers hovering close to the fabric but never touching. In my world, cloth was something you pressed, cut, stitched. Here, it was art you admired from a respectful distance. I thought of the dresses I'd made for church socials, school graduations, the occasional wedding serviceable things meant to last. It was Ruth's world, polished to a mirror sheen, and I could see my reflection in it plain, lined with years of work, wearing a coat that had been mended too many times to count. Upstairs, Ruth's office sat like a command center behind a frosted glass door. The desk was a sleek stretch of walnut. On its surface, a crystal vase held lilies, just past their prime. Papers were stacked in precise order, and a silver pen lay perfectly parallel to the edge. I noticed, almost absently, A drawer on the right-hand side with a small brass lock. My hand hesitated on the handle. It didn't budge. Something about the way the lock gleamed told me it was important, but I let it be for now. The staff moved around me like polite shadows. A young woman with neatly tied hair offered me coffee, her smile professional, her eyes curious. A tall man in a tailored vest nodded as we passed in the hallway. They spoke fondly of Ruth. When I asked her eye for detail, her ruthless efficiency in business, her ability to charm difficult clients. But whenever I steered the conversation toward her personal life, the warmth cooled. Words became careful. Lips pressed shut. I recognized the tone. It was the same one people used in Willow Creek when they didn't want to be drawn into family business. By the third day, I felt the familiar sensation of fading into the background. I had lived much of my life that way, in the soft-edged shadow cast by Ruth's brighter star. No one here was cruel, but their reserve was a polite curtain. They worked for Ruth, not for me. And until I proved myself, or until they decided I couldn't, they would keep their distance. In the afternoons, I would step outside for air, and I began to hear murmurs from beyond the boutique's walls. Philadelphia's social scene was smaller than it looked from the street. Whispers traveled fast. James and Elaine, it seemed, had started their work early. Over lunch with old acquaintances, they hinted that I was after Ruth's money, that I had shown up only to take what wasn't mine. In certain corners of the city, the word gold digger began to circle, attached to my name like a bird a cloth. At night, back in the cramped motel room, those whispers gnawed at me. I wondered if they were planting seeds of doubt in the staff here too. Why would Ruth choose me? I asked myself. That more than once, I had not been at her side. In her final years, I had not shared her triumphs or witnessed her struggles, and yet she had written my name into the heart of her legacy. It was a mystery that pressed at me like an unfinished seam, visible, imperfect, waiting to be fixed. Something had happened in Ruth's life that I didn't know about, and until I found out what it was, I would always be the stranger in her world. It was late afternoon when the rain began. Soft at first, then heavier, drumming on the boutique's wide windows, like impatient fingers. I had decided to stay in Ruth's office after the staff left, determined to sort through her things. The desk, with its gleaming walnut surface and carefully placed stationery, had become a kind of puzzle to me. Every drawer I had opened so far was neat to the point of intimidation. Receipts in labeled folders, contracts arranged in chronological order, even pens lined up like soldiers. It was in the act of dusting the side panel that my rag caught on something. I leaned closer and saw it. A barely visible seam running vertically along the panel's edge. My fingertips found a small metal nub, no larger than a shirt button. When I pressed it, there was a soft click, almost shy, and one of the lower drawers eased open an inch. My breath caught. Inside was a plain leather-bound book, the dark brown softened and worn at the edges. It had the weight of something often handled, the spine slightly bent, from being opened and closed, over and over. I carried it to Ruth's chair, sat down, and for a long moment just held it in my lap. The room felt suddenly too quiet, as if it knew I was about to trespass into something private. The first page was dated 5 years ago. The handwriting neat, flowing. Unmistakably, Ruth's brought a lump to my throat before I had read a single sentence. The 3rd of January. Called Vera today. No answer. Left a message. I hope she calls back. I want to see her this spring. I turned the page. Another entry, a month later. James told me Vera is busy. He says she has no interest in reconnecting. That can't be true. I know my sister. The entries continued. Month after month. Letters mailed. Phone calls placed. Even a planned trip to Willow Creek, all ending with some excuse. Some barrier. Sometimes, James had told her I was unwell. Sometimes, Elaine claimed I was traveling. There were notes about calls never returned. Postcards she had sent that came back marked undeliverable. I had never received a single one. By the time I reached the middle of the book, my hands had begun to shake. I think they're keeping her away from me. They think she will take from me. But if they knew her, really knew her, they'd understand Vera has never taken from anyone. She makes things out of nothing. Further on, the entries grew more reflective. Ruth wrote about our childhood, about the guilt she still carried for not stepping in when our parents favored her so openly. She remembered the winter we sewed that extra blanket together, how my stitches had been straighter than hers, even then. She called me the quiet strength in the family. And then, toward the end, if you are reading this, Vera, it means I have gone and you are here. I have left you the atelier because you will guard its spirit. Use it to lift other women who have had to fight for their own worth. Do with it what I could not. I closed the diary and pressed my palms over it, holding it as though it might vanish. The grief came first, a deep, shuddering ache for the years stolen from us, for the birthday calls and cups of tea that should have been ours. Then came the rage. Sharp, clean, unflinching. James and Elaine had not just kept me from her. They had lied to us both, feeding her the same poison they had given me, that the other had simply stopped caring. I had lived with the quiet humiliation of thinking my sister had let me go. Now I knew the truth was the opposite. She had been reaching for me until the very end. When I finally stood, my legs felt unsteady, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been since I set foot in Philadelphia. This wasn't about inheriting a boutique or holding on to money I'd never dreamed of having. This was about Ruth, about the woman who had believed in me enough to trust me with her life's work. I placed the diary back into the hidden drawer, locking it with a quiet click. As I turned off the office light, the rain outside slowed to a mist. Somewhere in the darkened showroom below, a dress shimmered faintly under a security lamp. The way a promise might shine if you caught it at the right angle. I knew then I would fight. Not because I wanted to win against James and Elaine, but because I would not let them erase her voice or mine. The air in Willow Creek was colder than I remembered, the kind that carried the smell of damp earth and chimney smoke. I walked the familiar streets slowly, my boots crunching over patches of frost, until I reached the corner where our old house still stood. The paint had peeled to a tired gray, and the porch sagged just enough to show the years. But when I closed my eyes, it was the same as it had been on that stormy night decades ago. Ruth and I bent over the kitchen table, a hurricane lamp between us, sewing scraps into a blanket, while the wind rattled the windows. She had laughed when my stitches came out straighter than hers, and I had laughed back, not caring about the thunder outside. For that one night, we were just sisters, neither favored nor forgotten. I carried that memory with me to Clara's small house on the edge of town. She was thinner than the last time I saw her, the illness etched into her face, but her eyes were still sharp. Over tea, I told her everything: the will, James and Elaine's threats, the diary. Clara listened without interruption, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Don't let them take it, Vera. If she trusted you, that's all that matters. You've spent your whole life not fighting for what was yours. Maybe this is the time you should. The next morning, I found a lawyer in town, Mr. Hanley, a man whose office smelled faintly of old books and stubbornness. He warned me it wouldn't be easy. But when I slid my envelope of savings across his desk, I saw something flicker in his expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition that I was not stepping into this lightly. Back in Philadelphia, I began shadowing the boutique staff, determined to learn the workings of Ruth's world. Sophia, a young designer with ink smudges on her fingertips, took it upon herself to guide me. She showed me how new collections were planned, how fabrics were sourced, how fittings could make or break a client's loyalty. She didn't treat me like an interloper. Instead, she seemed to see in me something I had almost forgotten: capability. The goodwill didn't last outside those walls. James and Elaine's efforts doubled. Legal letters arrived weekly, each one dressed in the formal cruelty of legal language, accusing me of fraud, of manipulation, of stealing what was rightfully theirs. Rumors bloomed like mold at luncheons, in boardrooms, whispered just loud enough for someone to repeat. When the second invoice from Mr. Hanley arrived, I knew I couldn't cover it with what little I had left. That evening, I opened the cabinet in my motel room and wrapped my mother's old Singer sewing machine in a sheet. Its enamel was chipped, the gold decals worn thin from decades of use, but it had been my constant companion since girlhood. Selling it felt like giving up a piece of my own history. Yet as I handed it over to the dealer, I felt a strange calm. The machine had taught me how to work, how to endure. Now it was funding the fight to protect something far bigger than myself. By the time I returned to the boutique, the sacrifice had settled into my bones. I was no longer just Ruth's sister. I was her defender, and I intended to see this through to the end. The letter arrived in the Morning Post. Thick cream paper embossed with James's law firm's crest. I knew before opening it that it would not be good news. His words were as sharp as the edge of Shear's formal threats dressed in legal jargon, but their meaning was plain. If I did not sign over Ruth's atelier within the week, he would move to seize my home in Willow Creek, the house where I had spent my entire adult life, where every cupboard and floorboard carried my history, was now just another pawn in their game. For a long while, I sat at Ruth's desk, the letter spread before me, the city noise drifting faintly through the window. My anger had shape now, solid and cold, but underneath it was something steadier resolve. If they were willing to strip me of everything, then I would show them what it meant to have nothing left to lose. That night I pulled out a folder I had found weeks ago among Ruth's old design sketches. One particular drawing had always caught my eye, a gown of deep midnight blue, its lines clean and unapologetic, with a subtle twist of fabric at the waist, like a knot being pulled tight. There was power in it, and grace, and something almost defiant. I set up the boutique's workroom for the night, the hum of the sewing machine filling the quiet. My fingers worked the fabric as if they already knew the path. Cutting, pinning, stitching under the soft pool of the desk lamp. Outside, the city dimmed into shadows, but I kept going, each seam a memory. Ruth leaning over me with a pin in her mouth. Ruth saying, "Don't just sew the cloth, Vera. Sew the feeling into it." By the time the sky began to pale, the dress hung finished on the mannequin. It was exactly as Ruth had sketched it. But somehow, it was mine too. A piece of her. A piece of me, joined together in thread. I felt lighter and heavier all at once, as if I'd stitched my own spine into the fabric. In the morning, I brewed coffee I barely tasted, then picked up the phone. My voice was steady when James answered. "Come to the boutique," I said. "Bring Elaine. Bring Tom. We'll discuss terms." There was a pause on the line. Perhaps surprise, perhaps suspicion, but he agreed. When I ended the call, Sophia was at the doorway, her arms folded loosely. She had that look, the one that said she could hear trouble coming before it arrived. "Should I be here?" she asked. "You should," I told her, "and make sure the others are around." She didn't ask why. She just nodded once, her eyes sharpening, and slipped away to spread the word. As I stood in Ruth's office, looking down at the navy dress, I felt a curious calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I would face them not as the quiet sister from Willow Creek, but as the woman Ruth believed I could be. And this time, they would hear me. They arrived precisely on time, as if punctuality could disguise intent. James in his perfect charcoal suit, Elaine in a cream coat that probably cost more than my first car, and Tom, trailing behind, watch glinting under the showroom lights. I stood at the center of Ruth's atelier, the navy dress I'd sewn hanging silently on a mannequin to my left. Around us, the staff had paused their work, scattered in doorways, and along the mezzanine, pretending to tidy racks, while their eyes stayed fixed on us. Sophia stood near the counter, arms crossed, her gaze steady on me. "Vera," James said, with the same clipped civility he might use for a client he disliked. "Shall we get this over with?" "Yes," I said, my voice even. "Let's." I reached for the leather-bound diary resting on the counter. It felt heavy, not just in weight but in consequence. I opened to a page I had marked, and began to read. "The 14th of March. Called Vera today," Elaine answered. "Said she was away. I don't believe her. I've tried 3 times this month." The air in the room seemed to tighten. I turned a few pages. "The 9th of June. Sent a letter with an old photograph of us as girls. It came back, returned to sender. James says Vera must have moved without telling anyone. That isn't like her. Something is wrong." I kept going. Each entry, Another thread pulled loose from the neat fabric of their lies: Ruth's regret over our childhood, her pride in my resilience, her explicit wish for me to carry forward her mission of empowering women. Her words painted them plainly. Children so blinded by fear of losing an inheritance that they cut off their mother's final attempts to mend what was broken. James shifted, clearing his throat. "This is sentimental nonsense," he said, forcing a thin smile toward the staff. "Grief makes people say things they don't mean. These were private ramblings, not legal directives." Elaine's composure cracked. Her lips pressed together, then parted in a rush. "We didn't want to lose everything," she said, eyes darting between James and me. "You think she didn't talk about giving it all away? To strangers? We were protecting ourselves." Protecting yourselves," I repeated, my voice low. "By taking from both of us what little time we had left." I closed the diary. The sound of it snapping shut seemed to echo in the quiet. I straightened, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I will be keeping Ruth's atelier," I said, each word deliberate. "But I won't be keeping it for myself alone. I'm establishing the Ruth Whitman Scholarship Fund, support for young designers from backgrounds like mine, who might never otherwise have a chance." That is the kind of legacy she wanted. James's jaw tightened. Elaine looked away. Tom's expression was unreadable. Though his hand twitched at his cufflink, I met their eyes one by one. "You're welcome to contribute. If you truly want to honor her, you'll put something into this that doesn't come back to you. But I suspect you won't." Silence followed, the kind that feels like a verdict. The staff were watching openly now, some with their chins lifted just slightly, as if proud to be in the room. For the first time since I'd stepped into this place, I felt my own voice, filling it, not borrowed, not apologetic, but mine. They left without shaking my hand. I stayed where I was, the diary warm in my palm, the navy dress beside me catching the light. And for the first time in years, I wasn't standing in Ruth's shadow. I was standing beside her. The decision came on a crisp morning in early June. I was in Ruth's office when Mr. Hanley called, his voice steadier than mine. "The court has upheld your sister's will, Miss Whitman. James and Elaine have withdrawn their lawsuit." Just like that, the threat that had shadowed me for months dissolved. There was no triumph in me, only a deep, measured relief, like letting out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding. The next week, the boutique became mine, in name, as well as in spirit. Sophia and I stood in the center of the showroom the morning the papers were signed. The air smelled faintly of roses from a congratulatory bouquet one of Ruth's old clients had sent. "Now the real work begins," Sophia said, and I knew she was right. We set to it at once. The Ruth Whitman Scholarship Fund was the first order of business. We combed through portfolios, letters, and interviews, searching for someone who carried the same grit Ruth had once seen in me. Our first recipient was a young woman named Marisol, barely 20, working nights in a diner to pay for design classes, her sketches bursting with life and color. When we told her she had been chosen, her eyes filled the way mine had when I first opened Ruth's diary, disbelief, giving way to something stronger. I spent my evenings in the workroom, pulling pages from that diary, laying them beside bolts of fabric. Ruth's notes became patterns in my mind. Elegance stitched together with utility. Gowns that could turn heads, but still be worn without fear of tearing a seam. I sketched late into the night, imagining how each piece would move, how it would feel on the body. It was the kind of work that reminded me why I had started sewing in the first place. Not to impress, but to endure. James and Elaine vanished from my days like a bad season passing. There were no calls, no letters, no half-hearted olive branches. Whatever existed between us had broken beyond repair. Yet I found I could live with that. The bitterness that had burned so hot was now just an ember, cool enough to hold without pain. My family, I had learned, could be chosen, as well as given. And here, in the hum of the boutique, I had found mine. On the last evening before our new line went into production, I sat alone in the workroom. The sewing machine purred under my hands. The navy dress I had made before the confrontation folded neatly on the side table. Beside it sat a small framed photo, Ruth and me as girls, hair tangled from the wind, a patchwork blanket draped over our shoulders. I looked at it and felt no regret, only the quiet satisfaction that comes from finishing a seam properly. Love, though delayed, had found its way through, and now it was stitched into every corner of this place, where it would hold, thread by thread, for as long as I could keep it. Life has taught me that silence can be as damaging as words, and that love left unspoken can be stolen by time. I learned too late that we must guard the connections that matter, even when pride or misunderstanding stands in the way. Standing up for what's right isn't about winning. It's about honoring truth, protecting legacy, and leaving the world with something worth passing on. No matter your age, you still have the power to choose dignity over surrender, action over regret. If this story touched you, subscribe to my channel for more heartfelt grandma revenge stories that remind us of life's true values.